everyone hear me? Hello, and thank you very much, everybody, for coming. This is one of the best attendances I've ever seen at a Taxpayers Alliance think tank event. We do have a seat at the front here. That's reserved. Apologies. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Just quick housekeeping. Chris is running late. I think he's popping over to a refugee camp just to see if there's anybody that he can make a video of. So we'll have to crack on without him, but he is going to join in 10-15 minutes. We've got an absolutely incredible panel today. And what's really notable about this panel is actually about 2 years ago, I think, we did a debate in the think tank about immigration. And we had a couple of people from the free market movement on one side make the case for immigration, and a couple of people on the other side make the case against immigration. And what's very different about today is we have a panel who are all going to be, I think, broadly singing from the same hymn sheet. And I think that is a reflection of just how much the debate has moved on, not just within conservative politics, but actually I even think to an large extent within free market politics. At the time, it felt like a genuinely live issue. It now feels like a settled issue, and the only thing that you have to work out is to really flesh out the details of exactly what your immigration policy should look like. Because I think there is no doubt now that the period of mass migration the UK has seen over the past not just 5 years, but 25 years has had a net negative impact on our society, culture, and our economy. And just last week in this city, we saw the violent murder of British Jews by a Syrian-born man we had granted citizenship to at the age of 16, despite his given name effectively translating to holy war. But while the need to act and act decisively has been established beyond doubt, as I said, the details remain to be fleshed out, and that's why we have assembled a star-studded panel for you, even if one of those stars won't be studded for a few more minutes. And just to introduce my panel, we have Katie Lamb, who's MP for the World since 2024, one of the rising stars of the party, who has even been tipped as a future leader and has indicated her ambitions. Sorry, Katie. Future leader, to be clear. You know, the future's a long way away. So we also have Nick Timothy, MP for West Suffolk and former Downing Street Chief of Staff, Melissa Tork, Communications and Digital Manager of the Centre for Policy Studies, and the TPA's very own Rory McGregor, Chairman of the Taxpayers Alliance, and we will at some point, as I said, have Chris Philp, MP for Croydon South and Shadow Home Secretary. And Nick, I'm actually going to ask you to start, so please go ahead.
Well, thank you very much. I thought that introduction was absolutely perfect because I think it is the case that opinion has moved on, and while we were arguing about whether immigration was too high and needed to be brought down, really quite recently, now there is consensus about the fact that it has been far too high, but I think the test is not whether we agree on that, because there's been plenty of willing the ends and not the means with immigration policy for quite some time. The test is whether we are prepared to do what is necessary to not only get the numbers down again in future, but to try to reverse some of the effects of the immigration mistakes that have been made in recent years. I've probably spent too much of my time reading the likes of Burke and Oakeshott and stuff like that. And there's a quote from Oakeshott, which is quite famous, about how Conservatives are supposed to prefer the tried to the untried, the familiar to the unknown, the near to the distant, present laughter to utopian bliss. And I think about that sometimes when I think about immigration, because the decision, and it was a decision, it wasn't a mistake, it was a conscious decision, to create the world's most liberal immigration system after Brexit makes me very angry, because it's not what Conservatives are supposed to do. This was not preferring present laughter to utopian bliss and so on. It was the least conservative thing a Conservative government could have done. And it's one of the reasons we're in the mess that we're in and that Kemi is now trying to clear up. So I think we always have to start a conversation about immigration with that kind of frank assessment of those decisions that were made when we were in office. And why it's so important that actually the party is now committed to trying to reverse the Boris wave of immigration that we saw in the last few years. So with illegal immigrants and foreign criminals being deported, with people who've come here on time-limited visas being asked to leave again when their visas expire, with reforms to indefinite leave to remain, to make sure that temporary immigration doesn't become permanent residency automatically. And I think it's very important that the party is doing that work, and very welcome that that we've made the policy commitments that we have over the course of the last year. Actually, it hasn't just been done in the last few days. There's been serious work done by Chris and Katie and the Home Affairs team. And what I wanted to do was to just make two separate arguments. One is about the economic case for mass immigration, which I think has been absolutely shot to pieces through the painful experience of the mass immigration that we've had in recent years. There's the obvious effect on the capital stock. So between June 2023 and 2024, the population of this country grew by 755,300. That's about the size of Leeds. 98% of that growth was due to immigration. So Leeds has 7 hospitals, 362,000 homes, and 219 primary schools. But in that period, where immigration contributed to population growth of the size I just described, Britain built 3 hospitals, 229,000 homes, and closed net 33 primary schools. You can see what mass immigration does to the capital stock of the country. And we know that most of the immigration we've had is fiscally negative. We know that from various studies, especially from Europe, because the British state is quite reluctant to publish a lot of the data, the average asylum migrant will cost £400,000 per person net over the course of their lifetime. And we know from other studies by the likes of the Migration Advisory Committee that mass immigration has caused British workers to be displaced from the labour market and have their wages pushed down. So, and we also know that the profile of immigration matters because of studies in countries like Denmark, where the government publishes a regular assessment of the fiscal contribution made by migrants based on their different backgrounds. And they find that immigrants from the Middle East, North Africa, Pakistan, and Turkey are net negative from a fiscal perspective, costing on average £10,000 per person net per year. And what's true of the economic case is true of the social and cultural case as well. We know, we all have friends who have migrant stories, and this isn't about sort of individual people and individual stories. But we know when we have mass emigration of this kind of scale, that there are serious costs from a social, cultural, and actually a political perspective. So there are lots of stories from, lots of research reports from across Europe which show that support for redistributive taxation, which might not be very popular at the TPA anyway, falls as immigration increases. There are other studies from across various Western countries which show that as countries become more diverse, there's a reduction in trust, not only between strangers, but between neighbours and between members of the same ethnic groups. And these aren't like right-wing, harebrained, freewheeling academics doing this, not that there are any of those. There are people like Robert Putnam, who's a very well-respected left-wing American academic who did a study focused on Scandinavia several years ago, where he said immigration and ethnic diversity challenge social solidarity and inhibit social capital. This is all done from sort of relentless academic research. And we saw it, you just alluded to it in the introduction. We saw what happened half an hour up the road from here last week with the attack on the synagogue. We are, in many ways, a very successful story in terms of how Britain has created a multiracial society where actually nobody blinked that Rishi became Prime Minister. Nobody blinked that Kemi became our party leader. We are in lots of ways very at ease with being a multiracial society. But if you look at the census, you can draw a clear line through lots of British towns and cities where on one side of the line you have a kind of white British community, on the other side of the line You have an Asian Muslim community. There is terrible segregation in some of our cities. And we have to be honest with ourselves that when we're thinking about immigration that we want in the future, obviously the numbers need to be radically reduced. Obviously we'll want people to contribute, but we have to be honest that not every culture, as Kemi said, is equal, and not all migrants are the same. So 72%, according to the census, 72% of British Somalis live in social housing. 1 in 3 Pakistani and Bangladeshi heritage adults is economically inactive. 1 in 50 Albanians here is in prison. We have to be honest about these statistics and this evidence base if we're going to inform our policy and make sure that it's right for us in the future. And that, in the end, is the essence of the debate about immigration policy. It has to be right for this country and the people who live in this country.
Thank you, Nick. We'll go to you next, Katie.
Thank you. Well, Nick has covered a lot of the fundamentals of the issue, and I won't retread the same points, but I was asked to talk specifically, I think, about housing and government services. Now, it's tempting when, as I do, you work in the Shadow Home Office to think that sort of all roads lead to immigration, but because immigration has been so out of control, it does become difficult to have a democratically legitimate conversation about lots of things until and unless you have sort of gone through the immigration conversation. So how do you have a democratically legitimate conversation about housing when estimates say at least a third of our housing shortfall is due to immigration? The best estimate for how many homes you need to build to keep up with the pace of net migration is something like 515,000 a year. That's never going to happen. There is no democratic legitimacy behind that. Nearly half of social housing in London is occupied by those born abroad. And exactly as Nick said about the statistics that he was quoting, once you start to be honest about these things, there are a series of subsequent questions about whether the people who've come to this country are net additive, and the unavoidable conclusion that you have to come to is that they're not. It is the case, there's a lot of discussion. We've seen the government fail to do it, and we've seen, I think, a much better plan from the Conservative Party about how to start controlling the welfare bill. But similarly, how do you have a legitimate conversation about that when 1 in every 6 people on universal credit is not a British national? Costs an estimated £6 billion a year. We don't actually know the number because the government won't release that information. But as Nick rightly touched on, the fiscal impact, the infrastructure pressure, and then, of course, the social and cultural issues that he discussed, all of those things, when looked at honestly, lead you to the inevitable conclusion that we've had both far too much migration and the wrong kind. And until and unless we are willing to be completely honest about that and implement everything that we will need to implement to fix that, I think a lot of our policy offering goes a very, very long way to do that, then we aren't going to rebuild that trust with the public, because this is probably the main way. You know, every election-winning manifesto since 1974 promised to reduce migration. It's been over 100,000 people net since 1997, apart from 2020 for obvious reasons. And that's not legitimate, and it can't go on.
Thank you. Melissa.
Thank you so much. It's going to sound like I'm reading off a lot of stats, but one, they speak for themselves, and two, I work for a think tank, so I think I'm allowed to. In 2020, the health and social care visa was introduced. It was a temporary measure responding to the pandemic. At the time, Parliament were told by the government they reckoned around 6,000 people per year would come on it. In 2023, 349,000 people came on it. Over 4 years, over 500,000 people came on it. And we didn't just take these people, we took their family members. 1.4 dependents were brought on average. These families settle, they stay here, they get indefinite leave to remain. And as the OBR have pointed out recently, these care workers get old, and then they need care workers, and they just become another justification to bring even more imported workers in. It's just a cycle that keeps perpetuating. Care is like one of the worst, but also just one of many areas where difficult decisions have needed to be made, and ministers have just pulled the immigration lever. They've taken the easy route out. I can't imagine in this tent I need to remind many people of the scale of the Boris wave. The whole conference might be another matter. 1 in 25 people in the country right now at least came in the last 4 years. We're facing maybe like one of the most consequential demographic changes, like this decade is going to be, this decade is going to be one of the most demographically consequential decades in recent history. There are conversation shifts now, and we are talking about limiting immigration in the future, but we're not doing nearly enough to grapple with the fact that we've just massively shifted all our demographics and totally thwarted our economy, and as Nick pointed out so well, our culture as well. I imagine this panel is mostly going to focus on legal migration, but also we can't really view that in isolation of illegal migration and the asylum crisis we're facing at the same time. Last year, 37% of claims for asylum came from people that arrived in the country perfectly legitimately on work or education visas. That's almost the same amount of people who arrived on the boats. I think around 3% of student visas granted last year ended up in asylum claims. We're just clearly not bringing people over on these visas that are the right people to bring. And even if students coming over from internationally don't end up claiming asylum, they don't generally end up in good, high-paid, high-quality work. The graduate visa, which was restarted by Boris Johnson in 2019, is very different to other visas. Students are allowed to work in any job on any salary for 2 years, no requirements attached. The Migration Advisory Committee warned when this was being set up that it would likely result in a huge rise in low-paid immigration into the UK, and they were absolutely right. Home Office data published recently shows that among graduate visa holders in 2022 to 23, the average salary for those who'd worked for a full year was around £26,400. For Pakistani graduates, it was around £14,000. I know that the job market is a bit rubbish right now, but these just clearly are not the best and brightest people that we're bringing over. Across all skilled workers on visas, 51% are earning less than £30,000, and amongst their dependents, 3/4 are earning less than below the median wage. Again, these aren't temporary visitors. We've sleepwalked into a system where we basically guarantee that they can get indefinite leave to remain and they'll stay for the rest of their lives. And I think the reaction by many MPs to the proposed ILR changes from government, from reform, from the Conservative Party has shown just how deep the rot has set. They're reacting as though it's particularly immoral to not grant unconditional welfare or the right to stay forever to people because they're working here. That's never been the deal of how migration should work. It was never a ticket to citizenship, but we've sleepwalked into a situation where that has been the case for many years, and we need to get ourselves out of it, and we need to address the people that have already come over on it. We can get out of a lot of the difficult situations we found ourselves in. 8 out of 10 care workers are already British. The issue isn't really supply in this case, it's pay. We pay around £11 on average for care workers in the UK. So Sainsbury's local across the road hiring floor staff for £13.50, right? Which one would you go for? The Migration Advisory Committee has said that a rise of just 40p on the hour for care workers, about 3% of the care budget, would massively help with domestic recruitment rates. But again, it's a difficult decision. It hasn't been taken. It looks like for many years to come under this government, at least, we're still going to be importing thousands of care workers. The same thing happens with doctors. We cap our medical school places at around 7,500. We turn away around 18,000 of our own British doctors. Then we just end up importing from the same countries we're giving aid to, massively inflating our own immigration levels, but also taking away talent from poor countries that desperately need it. And there's been no economic payoff to speak of, as everyone's already covered. GDP per capita is still below 2019 levels, and we've just imported more than 2.7 million people, 2.7 million net, and we've got nothing to show for it. I think the conversation is moving in the right direction, but I think there's still a fundamental attitude problem that we need to deal with. It's totally unacceptable that it was the case for so many years that ministers and politicians from all parties thought it was an acceptable trade-off to make. We need to deal with that, or in 5-10 years' time, we're all going to be sat in this room, we'll be talking about much worse figures than we are now, and I imagine a lot of you will be significantly more angrier.
Thank you, Melissa, and I'm delighted to say I'm delighted to say we do now have Chris with us. Hi, Chris. I'm just going to hand straight over to you.
Brilliant, thank you, Elliot. My apologies for my late arrival. It is entirely the fault of Matt Dathan from The Times, who made me late. Where is Matt? He's compounded.
Could have at least come.
He's compounded
Howard.
his transgression by not even following me into the room. So my apologies for the late arrival. Look, as far as I'm concerned, the challenges we face in relation to migration are amongst the most serious our country has. And clearly, as far as the public are concerned, it is consistently the number one or number two issue. So we as a leadership of our party are taking this incredibly, incredibly seriously. Let me start with just an honest and candid acknowledgement of where we went wrong in the past. Immigration levels under successive governments, but including the last one, have been far, far too high. So Kemi and I start from a position of openly and honestly acknowledging that some pretty serious mistakes were made. The numbers should never have been as high as they were. We have listened, we have learnt, and we have changed. And under a future Conservative government, that will never happen again. Now, let me just start by saying a word about illegal migration. You'll have seen, obviously, the announcement we made a day or so ago on coming out of the ECHR. Now, the experience that I had in government, and probably the same is true of Nick and Katie, both of whom worked as special advisors in the Home Office, is that inside the ECHR, it is extremely difficult to pass the laws that are needed to protect our borders, and it's extremely difficult for the government to take the executive action needed to protect our borders because you get injuncted using the ECHR, which is incorporated into our domestic law via the Human Rights Act. One of the reasons the last government wasn't able to take the actions that you or I would have liked is because the ECHR provided a constraint. The Labour government, who are simply tinkering around the edges, are discovering exactly the same thing. That is why we concluded we need to come out of the ECHR in order to control our borders. And we wanted to do that in a way that was considered and thoughtful, not in a way that was just sort of shooting from the hip, as some people in politics do. So we commissioned Lord Wolfson to look at this properly. He published his report, and he shared our conclusion, firstly, that we need to come out of the ECHR to control our borders, but he also set out how we can deal with various challenges that arise, like the Good Friday Agreement. All of those challenges can be overcome. Don't let anyone tell you this is in some way impossible. It is not impossible. Don't let anyone tell you it makes us a pariah like Russia or Belarus. That is ridiculous, because countries like Australia, Canada and New Zealand have perfectly well protected human rights without the assistance of the ECHR. This country was the home of civil rights. You know, the Bill of Rights going back to 1689, the writ of habeas corpus, the list goes on and on. So we can protect our rights here perfectly well without the assistance of the ECHR. And of course, out of the ECHR, it enables us to do a whole load of things to protect our borders, which include banning asylum claims by people entering this country illegally, which means they can then be deported within a week of arrival, either to their country of origin if safe, or to a third country like Rwanda if not. And if you face the certainty or the near certainty of removal within a week of arriving, you're not going to bother crossing the channel in the first place. I went to Dunkirk over August, not everyone's idea of a brilliant summer holiday, I accept, where I went to a camp run by Albanian and Kurdish people smugglers. I spoke to quite a few of the illegal immigrants there. Eventually, I got chased away by somebody holding a machete who took exception to our presence in the camp. But the reason those people are there preparing to cross is they know that when they arrive, they're going to get put up in a cushy hotel by the Labour government, and they know their chances of being removed are virtually zero. If, on the other hand, they know they face the near certainty of removal, of course they're not going to bother crossing in the first place. That worked in Australia about 12 years ago with their Operation Sovereign Borders, where they reduced illegal immigration to zero by sea within a matter of a few months, and it's working in the United States of America right now, something that Katie and I discussed with Vice President J.D. Vance just a few weeks ago. Since the second Trump administration started, an approach like the one I've described has seen illegal crossings of the 3,000-mile American-Mexican land border go down between 80 and 90%. So the plan I've just explained is a plan that common sense tells you will work, a plan that works in Australia, and a plan that is working as we speak in the USA. So that is how we intend to tackle the Channel migrant crisis. Labour, of course, tore up the Rwanda scheme just days before it was due to start, before the first plane was due to take off. And as a consequence, numbers have skyrocketed. And this year so far has been the worst in history for illegal migrants crossing the Channel, now costing us £5 billion a year to accommodate them in hotels where many of those migrants commit serious criminal offences and work illegally, as I discovered when I went to a migrant hotel in central London and discovered loads of Deliveroo and Just Eat bikes parked outside the hotel in a nice little compound the Home Office had kindly provided for them to work illegally from. So thank you very much, Yvette Cooper, for that. We intend to deport all foreign criminals and anyone with no right to be here, and we intend to hit 150,000 removals a year. We'll do that by doubling the resources and, besides getting out of the ECHR, stripping away all of the legal nonsense that has frustrated our attempts to remove dangerous foreign criminals in the past, like getting rid of the Immigration Tribunal. So instead of judges deciding, it'll be the Home Office who decide. No more immigration legal aid and no more judicial review. And if we do that, we can deliver that 150,000 target and make sure we end illegal immigration in this country. Now, let me just say a word about legal migration. It's been far too high. There have been huge problems with a lack of integration. 1 million people in this country don't speak English at all or properly. There's one East London borough where 73% of children don't speak English as a first language. There are some nationalities where workforce participation, particularly for women, is pitifully low. Our country can't function, our society can't function if it is fractured and divided. So this integration problem is extremely serious. As Abraham Lincoln said, a house divided can't stand. Now, the first step towards fixing this is simply to massively reduce the numbers, because we can't have very large numbers coming in while integration is a problem. So a massively reduced number is important. We're going to do that by having a legally binding cap set by Parliament at a very low level to ensure the numbers coming in are very, very, very dramatically reduced. And before anyone says, well, is that going to be bad for the economy? I would say what we have seen in recent years, mass low-skill, low-wage migration, that is bad for the economy, because we now know that people who come here working on low wages, and many of them, by the way, don't work at all, I should say, consume more in public services than they pay in tax. And I think one of the reasons our national productivity has flatlined is that businesses, instead of investing in technology and in automation, have instead relied on mass low-skilled migration. And just to compound that even further, they haven't bothered hiring and training people living here already, which is why there are 9.4 million of our fellow citizens of working age who aren't working. So there is a simple solution to draw this together, which is dramatically reduce legal migration, have quite high salary thresholds, only people who are really genuinely skilled come in, and at the same time, using welfare reforms, combination of carrot and stick, get domestically the people who live here already off welfare into work and provide incentives to invest in technology. And if we do that, we can end the addiction to mass low-skill migration, which I think has been calamitous both for society, but it's also been, in my view, bad for the economy. Now, I'm not sure, I've probably already exceeded my allotted time. So, look, I hope you can see from what I've said now, and hopefully you've read the detailed Borders plan we published yesterday, we are serious. This new leadership is serious about ending the scourge of illegal migration and dramatically slashing the levels of legal migration. We're serious about this. We've got a plan to do this that is properly worked out, unlike Reform, who essentially come up with slogans in a pub and write them on the back of a fag packet, essentially. We've got a proper plan that people can have confidence in. And I hope as we explain this to the public in the coming weeks and months, the public will have confidence as well. I think there is only one party now, today, who will grip this, who has a plan to sort this out. That is the Conservative Party. I'm proud to be a Conservative MP. You're proud to be supporters. And together, we're going to get this sorted out. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. And actually, I'm going to stay with you briefly before I go to our final speaker, Rory McGregor, because you've laid out your detailed plans, but of course, the likelihood is you won't get the chance to deliver those plans for at least the next 3-4 years. If we think the situation is bad now, imagine how bad it will be then what sort of time frame do you think you can commit to in terms of, firstly, starting to make progress on this problem, but ultimately, how long do you think it will take you to get to a point where you can go to the British people and say, we have cracked this nut?
So first of all, we're going to be pressuring the current government to change policy on ILR, indefinite leave to remain, right now, tabling amendments in Parliament, putting them under pressure, so that recent arrivals, people who have arrived in the last 3, 4, 5 years, do not get the permanent right to stay here. And if they turn out to have come here supposedly to work and don't work, or only work on low wages, we think their visa should not be renewed and they should be asked to leave. We've tabled amendments in Parliament. Labour voted against those, although they have recently moved a bit of a way in our direction. They actually adopted about sort of 30% of our policy. So even in opposition, we can push the government to move in the right direction. I think when we get in, and I say when rather than if, then I think we'll come out of the ECHR immediately. We'll give notice, it's 6 months' notice. We'll do that on day one. We are working up already a detailed legislative programme. So I think within 6 months of getting back into office, we'll have legislated to implement the plan I've described. And I think by the end of the first year, we will see the results being delivered.
Thank you, Chris. And finally, Rory.
Thank you. When I first was asked to be on this panel, I sort of thought that I would talk about the numbers, and I realized that most of the other panel would talk about the numbers. And then I thought, okay, maybe the interesting thing would be to talk about it from an immigrant's perspective. Because as you can hear and see, I'm an immigrant to this country. I only arrived here in 1996. And then I thought, thinking about that, and I realized that I've been an immigrant since I was 8 years old. When we fled the left-wing intellectuals in Jamaica to go to Trinidad and Tobago, and I remember my father agonizing over the work permit process of going to just switching islands. And he explained, and I asked what was the problem, and he asked, and I asked what a work permit was. Well, what is it for? And he just said it simply: it's to protect the workers of the country, to make sure that the person you're bringing in will add value to the country and won't take a job from a local worker. So since I've been 8 years old, I've known this fundamental rule about immigration. The immigration law is there to protect the workers of the country. I arrived here in 1996 with 30 people from my business school class from the US. None of them were English. The English actually all stayed in the U.S. and the migrants, we made our lives here, et cetera, et cetera. So I felt that, this country has given a lot to me. I didn't want to come here initially because I wanted to stay in New York City, but I settled here. My wife and I fell in love with the place, raised our daughter here. We felt that we were giving to the country. I can guarantee you that the net my tax bill certainly emphasized that. And in fact, that same group of 30 people that arrived with me, half of them have already gone because of change in government and the taxes that came with it, and the rest of us are talking about when we're going to depart. And one of the perspectives I think I don't hear very much when the media talks about immigration is that, the key thing here is that the people that are born into privilege in this country aren't the nobility. The people that are born into privilege in this country are the working class, because they can get paid £15 an hour for a job whose world market price is £3 a day. And I don't think that's fully appreciated around the world. So you have the bottom 1% of this country is richer than 40% of the world. That's 3 billion people. So you have unlimited supply if they even come for work, right? Forget about benefits. The benefits are set at the same level. You're going to get the same kind of supply. So coming here is a privilege. The seats are valuable. You don't give them away for free for people that are not going to either appreciate the country or not going to add value to our economy. This country needs to stay competitive. It needs to increase its per capita income. I mean, I was shocked when I realized that our per capita income is lower than Mississippi in the U.S. and probably challenging Puerto Rico soon. So I feel that that has to be said. People have to realize this, that the world is much poorer than people even ever imagine. and the people coming are going to be are not people that have historic ties to the through the British Commonwealth, to the British Empire, that speak the language, that are, similar religion or religions that we're very familiar with. So I feel that that message has to be out there as well. This again, the seats can't be done, can't be sold off cheaply. They've already had mention of the costs of the migrants, 150,000 net cost. So that has to be part of the calculation. You need to set the salary thresholds for legal migration extremely high. It should be like people that work in the city, honestly, or if they're doctors, then they have to be specialist doctors, something like that. It can't be people that are going to be working in hospices or even nurses, etc., at levels of salary that actually make them drains on the economy. The other effect that will have is that you need to, it'll raise there was mention about the hospice clearing rate for workers, right? As free marketeers, as most of us I imagine are in this room, you need to raise the clearing rate for that sort of labor. And so if you keep on importing labor at £10 an hour, £12 an hour, those salaries will never go up. And yes, of course, it'll make things more expensive. It'll make hospices more expensive. It'll probably make your pizza cost £40 for a pie. But I prefer to pay more money to take care of my family or myself in my old age, or for food, than to pay 55, 60, 68% marginal tax rates to fund a benefit system that paying people to do nothing and nothing to add to the economy. So, yeah. So I feel, that is a message that needs to get out, because the working class, the governments have to understand they need to protect the working class. This cannot go on. The society will get diluted and destroyed. And I think what's interesting is that, for me, the only country in Europe that has really gotten this message is the Danes. And it's funny that it's the left-wing party in Denmark that has brought in some of the strictest immigration rules I've seen in Europe, and certainly in the recent previous 20 years. They've restricted the ghettoization of neighborhoods. You have to become a citizen, it takes 8 years, for which you cannot be on social welfare at all. And so because they realized a few years back that their electorate, their natural electorate, the working class, is who they're there to protect. Basically, I feel I agree with all the points made in with the previous speakers on deportations, etc., because it sends the right signal to illegal migrants. But for legal migrants, it needs to be a very high bar. Coming here is a privilege, and people need to understand this.
Thank you, Rory. And normally I would take. Normally I would take Chair's prerogative to ask a few questions myself, but given how many people there are here, I think we're going to open it straight to questions. So we'll go straight to this gentleman here, and if we can please keep our questions concise. If you can introduce who you are, say who your question is directed at, and we can try and get through as many as possible.
Hi, Alex, Wolf Power Club, one of the largest energy podcasts. Question to Chris Philp. I've ran and owned businesses for the last decade that employ about 80 people. I get inspected yearly by Food Standards Agency. I get inspected every 4 to 6 years by Ofsted for the education level they do. I've never in a decade ever been inspected about the legality of the 80 people that work for me, even though we do everything. And I'm interested that in the same time, I probably get on a personal level 3 to 4 parking tickets a year. So I'm interested, because on a serious point, why have we got so many resources to hit me as a motorist, but to check if I'm a good and legal employer, we have none? And could we just have a much more basic policy in opposition of just getting work inspectors?
Yeah.
Thank you. Good question. Chris.
You're completely right. One of the reasons we're proposing to double the resources for immigration enforcement is to increase those work inspections. It's outrageous that companies like Deliveroo and Just Eat, they're not sponsors, are they? Just check that first. It's disgraceful. Companies like Deliveroo and Just Eat essentially run business models that are facilitated by employing people here illegally. And when I visited that asylum hotel in central London and went into that compound, it was stuffed full of bikes to be used for those companies. And the Home Office were basically facilitating it by providing a compound for them to park their bikes in, and no one there had the right to work. So we need a massive increase in right to work checks to make sure people are abiding by the rules. I completely agree with you.
I think there's also a problem of enforcing the rules that we have when we do discover people breaking them. So I had a restaurant in my constituency, which is the most, 300 square miles of the most beautiful countryside you can imagine. We're not talking sort of big rag trade factories. They have been found 4 times over the course of a decade to be employing people illegally. They've racked up hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of fines. They've never paid a penny. We need, and the enforcement for that is kind of split between the local authority, the county authority, Companies House. All of that basically needs to come under immigration enforcement, and if you break those rules, that should be the end for you.
Thank you. Can I see more hands? I will do the gentleman right at the back standing.
Is it working? Yes, working. Okay. Well, I was particularly happy to hear from Chris that we did have an integration problem already before the big spike in the migration. Look, for any society, unless there is reproduction or recruitment, it's very difficult to sustain and grow. I'm not going to ask the panel to do anything on reproduction side right now, but in terms of recruitment,
And we appreciate that.
in terms of recruitment, integration, what are we going to do different when we come back? And I do love what I'm hearing from the front bench at the moment. I think the tone that you're actually setting is absolutely the right one. Kemi is actually saying the right things. We've actually kind of recourse. That's good. But how are we going to achieve the outcome on integration? Integration or migration without integration is never going to succeed.
Yeah.
I think it's maybe a good one for Nick to come in on.
So I think the starting point on integration always has to be the immigration system itself. We need to have control in the numbers. We need to be much more selective about the profiles of people who come. It shouldn't be possible to come here and not speak English, for example. And then we've got to look at what we do as a society. Now, I think this is actually really hard. I'm not sure the extent to which it's ever really been achieved in the kind of context that we're talking about with the numbers that we've had in recent years almost anywhere. You can talk about somewhere like America that's a melting pot where the history has always been of immigration. But they've obviously struggled in all sorts of different ways, and we're a very different country. There was a book that was published a few years ago by somebody who's actually a perfectly nice guy, but the book was called The Great Experiment, How we make diverse democracies work. And I remember looking at that and thinking, why are we taking this risk? If it's such an experiment, why are we doing this? So obviously it has to be about our immigration decisions. And then I think we've got to try to go full spectrum with absolutely everything we can think of to try to inculcate a sense of shared identity. If you look at what goes on in schools, the curriculum quite often barely touches large parts of our history. They all have special days for sort of different ethnic identities or different religions or whatever. There's very little about what we all have in common, which is our British identity. Public services are all spending an absolute fortune on things like translation services and things like that. We have to turn it all on its head. You shouldn't be able to live in this country if you can't speak English. You've got to show a proper commitment to this country, our way of life, our history, our institutions. And if you don't, then and you're a foreign national, then you shouldn't live here, and we should be prepared to say that.
More questions, please. We'll go to this gentleman right at the front on the right. There should be a mic coming in any moment.
Thank you. Is this working? Yes. I'm Brian Kirsch. I'm the chairman of North West Essex constituency. You'll know where I come from. I watched Nigel Farage and his gang last week with some dread. He seems to bring out the worst in people and the worst people. I was particularly concerned about what they were saying about indefinite leave to remain. And my question really relates to that, and a request that whatever we do is rather more nuanced than what they've got in mind. And I'll declare an interest, and I'll explain why. My daughter-in-law is Japanese. She's lived in this country for 20 years. She's been married to my son for 14 years. She's worked, paid taxes. She's not working currently. The reason she is not a British citizen is because you cannot have dual nationality with Japan and the United Kingdom. The same is true, I understand, in India, Pakistan, Singapore. And there are good reasons why people don't necessarily become full British citizens. It doesn't make them less a contributor to our society. And we need to be nuanced when we're dealing with this issue.
Thank you, Katie.
Well, I think the contribution point is fundamental to the changes that we've proposed to indefinite leave to remain. So essentially, in its briefest form, our policy about indefinite leave to remain, both getting it and keeping it, is if you are a net contributor, and if you don't, which is both financially measured and also socially, in that you have to not commit a crime, then you are welcome to have indefinite leave to remain after a period of time, but that it doesn't entitle you to state support. That state support it isn't for people who have indefinite leave to remain rather than citizenship. But there is no question that there are lots of people. Rory is obviously one, and it sounds like your daughter-in-law may well be another, who make a substantial contribution to the country, and we want those people and we want them to stay. And we don't necessarily, you're right, want all of them to become British citizens. But for state support, we do, that is something that we think is fundamentally important. And we believe that if you commit a crime, then you shouldn't be able to stay, that sort of violates your social contract.
Yep.
We'll go to the gentleman just in the blue tie on the right here. Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Edward. I'm from the Harvard and Stortford branch, and this is directed to the MPs, if I may. The question I wanted to ask is that because we've had immigration levels, net migration be so high over the last nearly 30 years now, would one solution possibly be not just simply heavily reduce the numbers, but to have maybe sort of a temporary moratorium for like 5 years on all new immigration, or at least very low levels akin to what the Americans did between the 1920s and the 1960s, where they barely let in anybody standard terms in proportion to the population. Otherwise, we could be what Peter Brimelow called an alien nation. Thank you.
Moratorium, Katie, Chris?
Well, I don't know if you want to go first. I'm happy to go first.
Look, I think I'll go very briefly. Look, I think a complete moratorium would be a mistake, because there are highly skilled people we want to come here to work in the technology sector, the finance sector, scientific research. You know, those people who are going to make a really significant contribution to our country and to our economy and to our society. I think we should actually be kind of welcoming in, providing they're going to make that really significant contribution. The way to fix it is to get completely end mass low-skilled migration. That has to just stop entirely. We'll achieve that partly with the hard numerical cap voted on by Parliament, so never again can we see these high numbers, and by setting very high, or pretty high, very high salary thresholds to make sure people who are coming in are going to be making that contribution. But I wouldn't zero it completely, because if a brain science surgeon wants to come here, or somebody wants to come to work at Goldman Sachs or somewhere, I'm not sure saying no would really serve our national interest.
I mean, that I think is essentially what I was going to say. With the addition,
That's a relief. I'm glad to hear
with the addition that the world is substantially more globally competitive than it was 100 years ago. A lot of returns accrue to talent, and talent tends to pool together. So if you make it very difficult for high-end mathematicians and physics professors to come to the UK, then you do make it very hard to be successful as we stand on the precipice of the next industrial revolution, which would be about things like robotics and AI. You know, people want to know that this is a country that they can come to do that kind of work.
Yeah, I agree with that as well.
Right, we'll do a trio of questions to see if we can get through as many as possible. We'll do the gentleman on the right here, the second row back. We'll do the young gentleman, two in. And then there's someone standing over there, so we'll do one after the other, please.
Rahul Bansali. So maybe just picking up on the previous question, it feels like as we're pursuing economic growth, we have a dilemma that on one hand, there is a very need to control migration, but on the other hand, we have what feels like millions of people sitting not in training, not in work, yet don't possess the skills or maybe the 2-3 GCSEs even to even enter the workforce. Maybe it's half the question, the debate also being focused on what are we doing about training the people who already live here, as well as stopping the people coming in here legally or illegally.
Thank you. And then the second one was a young gentleman here.
The phrase Boris wave has been used. I see Chris scribbling in his notes when I use that word. The phrase Boris wave has been used by Nick and by Melissa.
And you can answer the question then.
And I wonder whether the rest of the panel recognises that term, especially Chris, as our Shadow Home Secretary. Thank you.
And then the third one, gentleman standing over there.
Hi, Stuart. I'm a member. This is to Melissa, and it's the Danish study that kind of showed off the fact that many low-skilled migrants were net fiscally negative. That came out in 2018. Why has it taken so long for that truth to filter down, almost 10 years later?
Thank you. I think we're going to go to Nick for the first one, which, as a reminder, is essentially the issue of vacancies in the economy and how do you make sure that you fill those vacancies without the need to rely on migration.
Raoul, I thought it was a really important question because we spend a lot of time when we talk about immigration thinking about what you might call the barrier methods, which are essentially about the rules we create around visas, visa caps, rules to qualify for a visa, salary thresholds, things like that. There's another side to it, which is what we do with our own economy and our own workforce and our own talent nationally. And we have to be honest about the fact that it is not just, it's quite easy to pick on firms like Deliveroo, and I do. I think their business model is terrible. They're outsourcing a lot of their costs and imposing them on the public. But actually, structurally, we have a problem, which is lots of businesses have grown used to ready-made, cheap labour from overseas. You often hear people say, well, we can't get British people to do these jobs, as though the only alternative is migration and visas, not paying people more or training people better or something like that. But the government is also to blame. So we do exactly the same thing with NHS workforce planning. Loads of British trained doctors can't get positions. We're bringing cheaper, ready-made alternatives from overseas. It's ultimately self-defeating because it's adding long-term costs for us. And there's the welfare system as well, as you mentioned, and our post-18 education system, where we basically say 50% of the country has to go to university. A large proportion of those people may not actually get from that experience the things we promise them. But then for the 50% who don't go to university, we offer them next to nothing. And that's absolutely disastrous. I mean, the idea that we should have skills shortages in the obvious trades, when there are loads of young people who'd love to get those skills by going to college or doing an apprenticeship, is absolutely ridiculous. So yes, we have to talk about the visa system in the way that we all have today, but we also have to talk about very deep reform in our economy and the state.
Thank you. Chris, Boris wave?
I would not use that phrase.
Easy. And then Melissa, there's a question about the Danish study and why it hasn't filtered down.
I think if you presented that to most people, they'd say it's a Danish study, it's not a UK study, and we can't really help with that. We haven't run a long-term analysis in the same way, but that's the least of all our problems. We're really, really bad at data on migration anyway. There's already government documents this year that advise that we don't use the 2021 census because the demographic change has been so rapid since it happened already, which is mental. We should definitely rerun one very quickly. There's loads of really helpful data series we used to do, like really helpful breakdowns of welfare claims by nationality, foreign-born citizens, that we've just discontinued, or we've changed how we do them. And it's also just data in government is bad in general. Things are split across departments. The Home Office will have some things, the ABRs will have others, and there's just not much of a drive by anyone to improve upon it. I also think partly it's not accepted because I think we're all a bit traumatized by the framing of growth and migration recently. I think this is why people are calling for blanket bans and not giving much thought to growth, because we've constantly been told it's the best and brightest, it's a skills-based points system and everything. So I think in the face of such sort of hammer tone rhetoric, it's been quite hard to accept data like that.
I think it mainly is because it didn't fit the narrative. there's also a Dutch study that has exactly the same numbers, or close enough. And I think Migration Watch just came out with similar numbers for the UK. But it was arduous to get the data out of the government, so the government doesn't want to talk about it. Yeah, I think that's part of it as well.
Thank you. I think let's do 2 more questions. So the gentleman at the front here, and we'll do the gentleman at there's a lady, actually. Sorry, we haven't had a lady ask a question.
Yeah.
Carol Forshaw from Bolton West. You're talking glibly. If you'd put your phone down, please, I'd be grateful.
I'm listening.
You talk glibly about deporting 150,000 people a year, thinking particularly about illegal immigrants. If you have a young man stood in front of you who's thrown all his paperwork in the channel, do you know where he comes from? Does he come from Eritrea, from Gambia, from Ethiopia, Somalia? Where do you send him? We know you can't send him back to France. So what do you actually do with him? Thank you.
And then we've got a question here.
My question really is a sort of longer-term question that it's my very strong belief that the answer, which I'm happy to discuss in detail with Chris, you need to reduce the population of the country down to 60 million over a period of years, hopefully within about 10 years. And we need to look at our population and the land that we've got in comparison with other countries like France and Spain, and then wonder how unproductive we are relative to them. And the answer is because we're overpopulated as a country.
Thank you. So we've got where do you send people without papers, Chris? And then long-term population reduction. I don't know who wants to come in on that, but let's do the first one.
Okay, so look, in relation to the first question, if we can't identify where someone comes from, or if we genuinely can't send them to their country of origin for reasons of safety or practicality, that is where you need a safe third country such as Rwanda. That is exactly the approach that Australia took 12 years ago. In fact, they just sent everybody who arrived to this island called Nauru. And now you might say, well, how many people can you realistically send to somewhere like Rwanda? But the point about a deterrent is that very quickly the numbers go to 0 because people don't bother making the crossing if they know they're going to wind up somewhere else. So to just expand on the Australian example, they had 50,000 people a year crossing from Indonesia to Australia. That is, broadly speaking, similar to the numbers that we face today. And yet they only had to send about 3,500 people to Nauru before the crossings stopped completely and went to 0. And it took a matter of a small number of months, like 3 or 4 months, for that to occur. So obviously it's better to return to the country of origin, but if that's not possible, or they destroy their papers, as you were saying, that is why you need an alternative like Rwanda. And ironically, since Keir Starmer cancelled our Rwanda scheme just days before it was due to start on the 24th of July last year, the USA have started using Rwanda, I think including facilities that we paid for exactly the purpose that we had intended, which exposes the folly of Keir Starmer's policy. I'll very briefly try and address the question about population. And you mentioned productivity. I think one of the reasons our productivity has flatlined is that business has reached for low-wage, low-skill migration instead of investing in technology and automation. To give you one example, in South Korea, in manufacturing, so in factories, they have 9 times the density of robotic process automation compared to here, and as a consequence of that, they are much, much more productive. So I think actually mass low-skilled migration is one of the reasons we have a massive productivity problem.
I think the only thing maybe that I would add about overall population is that we are, this is not a word, but under-infrastructured, I suppose, for the population size that we have, to say the least. And so in some ways, I mean, it sounds like a kind of fairy tale answer, but you should fairly easily be able to get to a situation where people who aren't making a productive contribution to the country go home. That eases pressure on the infrastructure that we have. It gives us time to build more. And so we can kind of catch up with where we otherwise would have been, whilst also strengthening economically at the same time.
Thank you, Katie. And Chris does now have to go, I'm afraid. But I think we're coming to the end anyway. So unless any of my panelists have anything else they want to add to this.
Just one thing. Just on finding out where people are from after they've thrown away their papers. Given the population setup we're getting illegally, a 39-pound DNA test will tell you in an instant and with plus or minus a country. I'm an amateur genealogist.
On that note, I want to thank my panel so much for coming. Thank you for Chris in particular for his use of his time. Katie, Nick, Melissa, Rory, if I could invite you all to come back to this tent at 5:45 for our Think Tent question time, which is when the best and brightest of Westminster's think tanks will be in conversation with our own Duncan Barks. And yeah, I hope to see as many of you as possible. Thank you.